My name is Savannah Steffen. I've been a proposal administrator for 4 to 5 years now, and so we'll go ahead and get things started. As you said, this presentation, formulas, forms, and fine print. This is going to be an overview on the essentials for proposal preparation and submission. So to get things started, when should you get started with the proposal process? The short answer is as soon as possible, but we'll get into that. First, I want to reference our website, which we have linked here. This is an excellent resource and contains our guidelines. It also has specific forms, a contact directory, and contains these SRS Answers for You presentations. So to get back into it, let us know as soon as you select a funding opportunity. At that point, we can get started by reviewing the sponsor requirements, assisting you to prepare your budget, and preparing suggested next steps for the submission. We do request that you contact us a minimum of 3 weeks prior to the deadline for most effective service. We do understand that sometimes a funding opportunity may be seen or chosen at the last minute, but please understand that the proposal submission guidelines are designed to provide you with the best customer service in preparing and submitting your proposal. More time generally equals a more well-rounded proposal. While the necessary documents needed can change depending on the solicitation, the proposal should begin routing 5 business days in advance of the sponsor deadline. For routing, we typically need finalized budget, budget justification, subrecipient documents, any relevant waivers, and some form of abstract or statement of work. This is also the point where we send all relevant proposal documents to our quality control team so that they can provide backup support by reviewing the submission guidelines and the proposal submission itself. This includes items like the personnel documents, facilities, data management, and a draft technical. QC then provides feedback and notes on any discrepancies or issues, and this final check is also requested 5 business days in advance, which gives time for the review itself and then time for any possible corrections that are needed. Lastly, all technical portions of the proposal should be submitted to SRS in final format no later than 1 business day prior to the sponsor deadline. The SRS submission deadline itself is 5 p.m. Central Standard Time unless there's an earlier deadline time specified by the sponsor. Proposals in final format received to SRS in the timeline that we outline in the submission guidelines will receive a complete and thorough quality review. In the event that a proposal is received outside of the requested time frame, the investigator will assume the risk for proposals found to be non-compliant or that don't meet the deadline. So next, we have finding your SRS proposal contact, which is a relatively easy process. Shown in the picture here on the slide is a screenshot from our website. Once you go to the website, simply go to the My Contact tab. It's located at the top left of the screen, and then you can enter your department into the search box. It will list 3 primary SRS contacts: the proposal administrator, the project administrator, and the contract negotiator. The proposal administrator is your go-to person for getting everything started on your proposal. So your proposal might start by asking you for information about your proposal and the funding opportunity. For instance, who's the sponsor of the funding opportunity, or what is the deadline for your proposal? If you have any information about additional personnel or outside institutions that may also be involved, this is also very useful information for your proposal administrator to know. Having a clear picture of what you're trying to accomplish early on makes this process so much easier. And if there's any information that you might be uncertain about, our team is trained to work with you to track down the details we need to help you assemble and submit your proposal on time. These details also help us to accurately log your proposal and start a record in Maestro. Okay, so very important, make sure that you review the solicitation for key information. This should be the first step when determining if you want to apply for an opportunity. Check the due date. Of course, it's critical to know the date when the proposal is due to be submitted to the sponsor. This will determine whether you have sufficient time to prepare and submit a competitive proposal. The eligibility, This includes the eligibility of particular types of applicant organizations, any factors affecting the eligibility of the PI, and any criteria that make particular projects ineligible. The limits on the number of submissions. A lot of funding agencies issue requests for proposals that limit the number of applications that they accept from an institution. The manner in which the sponsor limits the application varies, but it can include limiting the number of proposals that can be submitted, limiting the types of institutions that can apply, or limiting PIs by the stage of their career. So if you find one of these opportunities that you want to submit to that is limited, you're going to need to go through the limited submission office to determine if you're selected to move forward. They have their own website to process limited submission applications and will help you on that front. Budget limitations. Is there a maximum amount that can be requested? Do they list allowable costs, non-allowable costs? Cost sharing or cost matching is that portion of project costs not reimbursed by the sponsor. Cost sharing requirements are always stipulated in the sponsor guidelines. Generally, our system policy is to only provide cost share if it's a requirement in the funding opportunity, so if it's mandatory cost share. If your project does require cost share, make sure to discuss this early on with your project administrator. It's the PI's responsibility to locate sources of cost share, whether this be from your department or other sources. Review criteria. So knowing the review criteria is an essential part of crafting your proposal. Basically, what will the sponsor reviewers be looking for? And then proposal document requirements. This is just following the guidelines, including all required documents that they list out and making sure that they comply with the formatting and page limitations, things like that. Understand the submission process, whether this is going to be an email submit or through a specific portal. Is there a pre-application required? Make sure you know all those details ahead of time. So one of the first things that we start with when preparing proposal materials is a budget. We use a specific Excel template that assists us with calculating expenses, whether it's salary, fringe, tuition, so forth. We just need you to provide us with what expenses you would like to include on the proposal. It's important to make sure that all expenses are allowed by the sponsor and to look back at any restrictions, cost sharing requirements that may be in place in the solicitation. We can continue to make changes on that budget or revisions until you're completely comfortable with how the budget looks and any overall totals. So starting to break down the different budget categories, all expenses fall into two broad categories, direct and indirect costs. So direct costs, these are the expenses directly tied to producing a specific good, service, or project and are easily traced and measured. These are funds that are distributed directly to the research team. This can include, it's not limited to, salaries, fringe benefits, equipment, materials and supplies, travel, subrecipients, etc. It's anything that you need to carry out the scope of your project. Indirect costs, these are also commonly referred to as overhead or facilities and administrative costs. These are costs incurred for common or joint objectives and therefore cannot be identified readily and specifically with a sponsored project. So these costs include things like rent, utilities, administrative salaries, and general office expenses. Essentially, these help support the infrastructure costs that institutions incur as a result of conducting research. In the following slides, we'll look a little more closely at the different cost categories associated with these. So first, we have the personnel costs. Your proposal administrator will use actual salaries for any personnel named on the proposal, and these numbers are pulled directly from Workday for the most accurate reflection. For any unnamed personnel, such as graduate students and postdocs, standard salary amounts based on colleges and departments are used. Then there's some questions to ask. Who needs to be on the project? Is their inclusion on the project justifiable? What role will they have? Is this a co-I, co-PI, other personnel? How much effort are they going to be committing? Does the sponsor have any guidelines or restrictions on things such as personnel effort? So to go a little deeper, included on this slide are a few links to some applicable standard administrative procedures, the SAPs, which can be found on the university website. Do keep in mind these specific links and examples are TAMU-specific SAPs, and everyone should refer to their appropriate member policies and SAPs to ensure member-specific compliance. So first link after the project roles is it contains definitions for personnel, including PIs, co-PIs, co-investigators, collaborators. So principal investigators, these of course are the leaders of the project who are largely responsible for all aspects. They're in charge of project direction, funds, and reporting. Co-principal investigators, they share a similar role with the PI, and they maintain fiscal authority over project funds. Co-investigators, these are quantifiable contributors to the research, however, they do not have any fiscal authority. And then lastly here is the collaborator role, which is a role for personnel who are not contributing a measurable amount of effort. This could be a TAMU personnel member who's advising or providing a small specialized contribution. The next link is in connection to how much time and effort is requested on a project. So the amount of effort and salary being committed to a project should directly correspond to the amount of work being done. Typically, 0% effort is not an acceptable level of involvement for senior personnel and would require additional justification and approval from the time and effort office. There are some caveats to this, which are fully listed there at that link for TAMU specifically. For example, 0% effort would be acceptable on equipment or travel grants or things such as scholarship or conference support grants. Your proposal administrator can go into more detail and assist with determining appropriate roles and effort as well. Okay, so next we have tuition and fees. So for PhD students that are in teaching, lecture, or research assistantships, there's a university-wide mandate requiring your tuition and fees be covered by your program or alternative sources of funding. So for sponsored research projects, these are automatically calculated in the budget Excel template using the amount of time a student is being budgeted and is based on a predetermined rate of per credit hour, depending on the associated department. As a student, the maximum amount of time that they can devote to a project is restricted to 50%, since 50% of their time is generally reserved for their studies. This can also be seen when a student is working full-time, they're being budgeted for 12 months, but at a 50% effort rate. Therefore, when a student is budgeted for that 50%, 100% of their tuition and fees are also budgeted on the proposal. All right, the next slide here, we have capital equipment. So the uniform guidance definition states that capital equipment is an item of property having a cost of $5,000 or more and a useful life of more than 1 year. So do note that this amount is going to go up to $10,000 the next time that our indirect cost rate agreement is negotiated, which will be soon. Our current agreement expires August 31st of this year. When budgeting capital equipment, make sure to obtain any vendor quotes or documentations that you need to support those large purchases of equipment. Some sponsors do request these quotes to be included at the proposal stage. Also be sure to include the following whenever applicable: installation costs, shipping costs, due to U.S. custom fees if you're purchasing anything outside the U.S., fabrication costs. If there's individual components that will be purchased to fabricate a piece of equipment, be sure and let your department business person know so that the correct object class code can be assigned to their components. But for instance, say you're purchasing multiple components and they're all going to be used in a single equipment assembly or finished product, that can all be included in that single equipment cost. Right, so if your project needs to have a consultant, a contractor, or a subrecipient, your SRS proposal administrator can provide guidance to ensure that the correct determination is being made on what that entity falls into. So it's really looking at what the entity is doing on the project is more important than what type of entity it is. So the first, consultants, they should only have a role in providing professional input. These individuals should not have a role in carrying out a portion of the work. Then we have contractors. Contractors provide a good or a service and also should not have a role or a meaningful part in the scope of work outside of what they're specifically being contracted for. Then we have subrecipients. So when TAMU is the lead institution and is collaborating with another institution that's carrying out a portion of the statement of work, that institution is considered to be a subaward or a subrecipient. TAMU will issue a subcontract document to the subawardee to provide their portion of the funding to them. And subawards do need to be disclosed in the technical section of the proposal to show a clear delineation of the work to be performed by each organization. So it's important that we know about potential subawards as soon as possible to give these institutions time to build their budgets and prepare all necessary documents. So next, travel costs. Travel is allowable as a direct cost where such travel will provide direct benefit to your project. This can include travel for things such as attending conferences to disseminate research, meeting with your sponsor, meeting with your collaborators, or for general field work. Some sponsors will require specific, detailed travel information to be provided, information like the location or purpose of the trip, number of travelers, number of days, and they will typically need some basis of cost. Your proposal administrator can assist to work up estimates of costs for the transportation, lodging, and food, but you should always make sure to review these numbers and ensure that they're adequate and realistic. All right, next, so modified total direct cost. So to calculate our indirect costs, the indirect cost rate, which is currently 54% for on-campus research, is applied to what is called modified total direct costs. The modified total direct cost consists of things like salary and wages, fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to the first $25,000 of a subaward. So note, just kind of like we talked about earlier with the capital equipment, this last item will go up to include the first $50,000 of a subaward when the new rate agreement is negotiated. The indirect rate applied to sponsored rate agreements is an average rate. Individual projects may actually incur more or less expense for facilities and/or administration. This is why it's renegotiated to account for changes in cost and inflation. So items excluded from modified total direct costs, this might be an easier category to look at. This includes, or rather excludes, capital equipment, patient care, offsite facility rental, tuition, scholarships, participant support costs, and then coming back to this, any subaward funds over the $25,000 currently, which as we just discussed, will go up to anything over the $50,000. So indirect costs are not charged on these particular line items in your project budgets. Okay, so budget justifications. Most sponsors do require budget justification as part of the proposal, and they give instructions on what details and justifications they require. The PI is responsible for preparing the budget justification as the person who can best delineate how various costs are necessary for the success of the project. The proposal administrator can assist by reviewing and providing suggestions, but they are unable to create these documents or write them out for a proposal. Budget justifications are very crucial. They allow PIs to justify cost to sponsors by showing how calculations were made, demonstrating why certain expenses are reasonable, and linking them directly to project goals. As it states here in the slide, we want this document to provide answers to the sponsor, not raise any new questions. So make sure that all of the information in your justification matches what we have in the detailed budget. Now, this wraps up the budget portion of our presentation, and I'm going to be turning things over to my colleague Lyndall to finish up our presentation.
Thank you, Savannah. So once you have your budget finalized, your scope of work has been provided, or a draft summary has been provided, and you finalize your budget justification, those items are provided to your proposal administrator for internal institutional approval routing. We complete the Maestro record. That is what is utilized as the review record when it is in routing. And those documents get compiled as a routing package for applicable reviewers, including PI, department head, dean, or equivalent, depending on your unit, and then member reviewers as appropriate. And this step is pretty important. It verifies that the institutional representatives have reviewed for space requirements, any sort of resource availability or requirements, and that all of that aligns with the unit and what is available and able to be provided to the PI for their project. Without this step, we essentially either can't submit a proposal or we run the risk of needing to withdraw or have significant delays later on due to issues that arise or concerns that might arise on the part of a department head or a dean or a unit administrator who's very familiar with what resources might be available. So this step is very integral in ensuring compliance and making sure that projects align with university or member resource availability. After the process sort of mixes and overlaps, but ideally after you have begun the routing process and that is all moving smoothly, once the proposal itself is packaged and final, again, a recall to these submission guidelines, that administrative documents are requested to be finalized 5 business days ahead of the deadline. While the technical may be still in draft, we understand some additional time might be needed to refine technical components. Administrative documents and components tend to make up a large chunk of a proposal package. So having those finalized 5 business days before is really helpful in ensuring that we can review for compliance, making sure everything is aligned with sponsor requirements and guidelines well in advance so that we can address any of those concerns. So once that's all finalized, we perform what we call a quality check review or a QC review. We have a team of individuals, pre-award administrators, who review the entire proposal package against the sponsor guidelines to make sure that all of the document requirements are met, all of the content requirements, components, sections, subsections, disclaimers, disclosures, any sort of statements that are required in a proposal are in fact included. This is not a technical review. We are not subject matter experts in your field of study. We don't perform research ourselves. So we are not equipped or knowledgeable in the technical side of things. So there are resources available on campus to sort of review that technical side. One of the main ones being colleagues, department head, anybody else that's maybe in your field of study that you might work closely with. What we are primarily looking at, as I mentioned, is a formatting and compliance review against the RFP or NOFO or guidelines and against member policies. We want to make sure we're not only compliant with the sponsor requirements, but also with our institutional requirements as well. I believe Savannah mentioned this earlier, but documents received less than 5 business days may not receive that QC review, but we will ensure to the best of our ability that the pre-award administrator who you are working with can at least put eyes on that document. Again, within that 5 business day window, we simply cannot guarantee bandwidth or ability to thoroughly review documents, but we will absolutely do our best to put eyes on them and make sure that they are compliant as we are able. Once everything has gone through a QC review, the researcher has revised any necessary documents, proposal has been routed and approved. All of this is the ideal situation. We then move on to submission. There are various ways that a proposal might be submitted. There are various ways that who might submit a proposal. SRS might submit on behalf of the member, which is pretty common. It's probably the most common way of method of submission. Basically, your proposal administrator submits the proposal on your behalf, on behalf of the institution as an authorized organizational representative. Through delegation of authority, we are able to do that on your behalf. Many sponsors and portals actually require it. PIs don't have the ability to submit their own proposals as a precaution to ensure that institutions are aware and have reviewed and approved proposals prior to submission. There are some cases where a PI is responsible for the submission of the proposal. This might be via email or a portal that has very specific access levels or requirements, in which case PIs do take on the responsibility of making sure those are submitted timely and by the deadline. And then we ask for confirmation of submission so that we can update our records. There are quite a few submission methods, as I mentioned, various portals, email. This doesn't happen very often, but we have encountered this at least in the last 6 months, I believe, but hard copy submissions where we have to either overnight or postmark a submission by a certain date. We do generally assist with that submission method as well. And then once a proposal is submitted, we do our very best. Some portals, some methods are not, the tracking is not available, but we do our best to track the submission and make sure it is received by the agency by the deadline date and that it is successfully submitted. And then our office updates funding decisions, whether it's declined or awarded as well. So in the discussion of submission methods, I mentioned various submission portals. One that I want to call attention to is not so much, it's basically a portal, but it's more of a program integrated with our Maestro system of record. And we utilize Cayuse as the company. Proposals S2S is the product. Proposals S2S is what is referred to as a system-to-system program, which facilitates the submission of federal proposals in grants.gov. So it communicates directly with grants.gov, pulls the packages, for the proposal packages from grants.gov. We complete the application, submit it through that system, and then it moves on to grants.gov in the same way that submitting in Workspace or submitting through for NIH submitters. Assist does the same thing. So it's just another system-to-system program that we are able to integrate into Maestro, which minimizes duplicative data entry on our end. The integration between the two allows for syncing of data and information and documents even. So the amount of duplicative uploading and data entry is just reduced for us, allowing for more effective and efficient service to you, the investigator. There is a single login and access point. You log into Maestro via SSO, and then from there, you can access Maestro access Cayuse through your Maestro login. So there's not multiple logins, multiple access points, multiple windows open. You can access your proposal application from one point. Proposals S2S also has a pretty robust rolling or live validation system. So as you are working on your proposal, uploading documents, filling out forms, the number of errors, you can see the number of active errors in your application. And as you are moving through your application, those active errors are essentially knocked off. So you can see that number getting lower and lower, and you don't have to wait until you have done several steps to validate and then see what you're missing or what's left to be completed. Finally, there's dual access for the PI and the admin. Both the PI and the proposal administrator have the ability to access the proposal and edit the proposal. Not at the same time. It does lock down the application package if one person is in it. And you do have to exit in order for another person to access it. That's just to minimize overlapping of work. But each individual has the ability to access, upload documents, fill up. I include a reminder here on the SRS Proposal Submission Guidelines. As we've mentioned, I think several times, part of the SRS Proposal Submission Guidelines includes some description of roles and responsibilities in the upload of documents. If given enough time, we are absolutely happy to upload documents and complete certain forms that have specific information. Administrative forms are our responsibility, but as we get closer to the deadline, uploading documents can potentially fall on the PI. That responsibility can potentially fall on the PI depending on bandwidth available. So that is outlined in our proposal submission guidelines. Also, just as a reminder for the timeline, the 5 business days, the 3 weeks for notice of intent, things like that. So once a proposal is submitted, at this point, it's the waiting game. We are sort of waiting for a funding decision to be made, waiting for merit review feedback to come in. During this time, which can take anywhere from 6 months to 12 months, and maybe even longer, depending on certain circumstances, especially with federal sponsors. A government shutdown can delay things pretty significantly, as we all experienced recent months. During that time, there may be what we commonly refer to as just-in-time requests, but just-in-time is a pretty NIH-specific term. But all it means is that it is documentation or information that is being requested between submission and a funding decision, something that will affect the review of the sponsor. This might include additional documents such as current and pending support, biosketches, anything that's been updated. This might be a list of updated references or publications. This could also include budget revisions. NSF it's pretty common for NSF to come back in the middle during a review period and ask for a budget reduction in order to recommend for funding. After that portion of time is passed, a proposal will either be declined or it will be awarded. If it is awarded, those award notices and documents go to our asset team, our award setup team, at awards@tamu.edu. So if there is ever a situation where you receive an award and we don't receive it, or your proposal administrator isn't aware of it, you can forward that award documentation to awards, and they will go through the necessary processes of getting that set up. Just to touch on some award setup expectations, our timeline for award setup is when we receive an award document that will be logged in Maestro within 24 hours of receipt. The project setup itself will be done within 5 business days after any compliance holds are lifted or cleared. If you would like more information on the award acceptance and setup process, there is an Answers for You Express video on this process, and I have linked that here. Outside of general proposal preparation, we did want to touch on some major federal agency updates that have occurred in the recent months or in the last year or so. A lot of these are with NIH. NIH has put out a lot of updates on proposal preparation, policy changes, things of that nature. There is a comprehensive listing of policy changes, or NOTs. I've linked that here, and I've also linked each individual NOT that I've called attention to here as well. So in July of last year, NIH effectively for FY26 limited the number of proposal submissions per PI to 6 per calendar year. This was to ensure that each proposal is individualistic and unique in preparation and submission. In August of last year, grants.gov, NIH put out the notice that effective FY26, grants.gov will serve as the single official source for grants and cooperative agreements being announced and available. Previously, they were posted on the NIH policy. I believe they were posted on the NIH policy site as well. In September of last year, they released or announced a new application structure for any applications including a foreign component. This could be an international subrecipient, a major international service provider, consultant. There is a definition of a foreign component included in this NOT as well. In December of last year, NIH removed the requirement for prior approval for direct costs over $500,000. That was effective immediately. So previously, prior approval was required for direct costs in any year over $500,000, and that is no longer required. And then in February of this year, NIH had previously made the requirement for common forms and the use of Science CV for biosketch and current and pending effective in January due to some issues that investigators were having with the site and getting all of those documents on time for submissions. NIH has issued a leniency period through May of this year. NSF released an announcement that they will be adding a data management plan tool to research.gov. This will be used in the preparation of proposals to prepare the data management plan. That is expected to be released April 27th of this year. Next, we're going to talk about a hot topic as of late, which is research security training. This comes out of the Chips and Science Act of 2022 and is designed to protect research from foreign interference or foreign influence. So Many federal sponsors have issued a requirement that investigators essentially certify that they have completed research security training within the 12 months preceding the date a grant application is submitted. DOE made this effective in May of last year. NSF implemented this in October of last year. NIH is effectively implementing this in May of this year. And USDA has not officially made this required as of yet, but it does sound like they are moving towards making this required. We just don't know exactly when. I do make a note here, research security training is likely to be required by many federal agencies. So we do generally recommend it is available on Train Track, I believe. So we do recommend that if you have not completed research security training and you intend to submit to federal agencies, getting that out of the way is probably the way to go. In the event that it is required, we don't want to be scrambling trying to get a training verified and completed. The next component that has come up in recent years is common forms, federal common forms. NSF and the use of ScienceCV in the preparation of those forms. So ScienceCV is a program that collects biographical information on an investigator and compiles it into forms in a format that each federal agency has established. So NSF set up their formats in ScienceCV, have established this as a requirement since October of 23. I believe the official requirement for this is more recent. It feels more recent, but essentially now NSF ScienceCV, there's some data in the background of the forms that if that is not in place, research.gov will not allow you to upload the document. NIH plans to require this in January. Again, intended to require this in January. Again, the leniency period is through May. They are still recommending that you submit ScienceCV compliant biosketch and current and pending as just in time. Some agencies or some ICs, institutes and centers, are requesting this even now as a just in time item. For Department of Energy, this is required by the Office of Science. USDA NEFA will begin requiring this as of March, or is requiring this as of March. And then Department of Defense, congressionally directed medical research programs, CDMRP proposals, the use of ScienceCV in preparing a biosketch. I believe an NSF biosketch is encouraged. If anybody requires any assistance in preparing a biosketch, the TAMU Libraries has prepared some resources and guides on that process. They're also more than happy for anybody with questions to reach out, or if you need further assistance, reach out to the libraries. Next, data management and sharing plans. With recent federal data management requirements and concerns, this has, along with research security training, been a little bit of a hot topic in making sure that we have data management plans in place, that we have institutional data management plans in place even. Most federal agencies require a specific data management and sharing plan for each proposal. The libraries has also provided some information on research data management services that they provide. Libraries also did a Answers for You presentation on data management services that is available on demand on our website as well. There are guides, and NSF provides, they have a web page on guidance for data management and sharing plans. I believe there are other sponsors. I believe NIH also has some information on data management and sharing plans, what's required, guidelines on preparing them, items that they are particularly focused on, that there is a plan, that there is a management path for data collected. I wanted to touch on as we sort of get to the end, I did want to touch on some proposal and research development resources. There are a lot of grant writing resources out there, and I did not include a grant writing link. I know there are grant writing resources at the university, and I did not include that specifically here, but I did include a link to our website. We have a lot of resources, forms. Our website has a PI guidebook that goes through the process of preparing a proposal, what's expected, what's required. Division of Research has, they have an office for research development services, and they are really great to work with. They are really knowledgeable, very organized, and they help with a little bit more of the technical side of things, or can help a little bit more with the technical side of things. Not necessarily the research portion, but making sure that institutional, facilities descriptions and things like that are in place. The libraries is a great resource, as we talked about the data management information, the biographical information. And then the last thing I do want to point out is an area that we don't often, I think, touch on is early career researchers, postdoctoral researchers. Within the Division of Research, we have the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs, and they provide a lot of resources for faculty mentors for early career researcher engagement. Some of those resources include a compact or agreement, essentially a listing of expectations between mentor and mentee. And then they also provide a mentoring plan template and guidance for various sponsors when you include postdocs or even graduate students in your research as part of your research plan. Many sponsors require the inclusion of a mentoring plan for postdocs and graduate students. So they provide a template for that and some additional guidance on completing that document. And then I also shared a link here for the postdoctoral professional development program. This is a program for, again, as it says, postdoc professional development. The postdocs participate in this program alongside with their mentors, and the existence of this program serves as a recruiting tool. It's recruiting tool for postdocs themselves, and then the enhancement of competencies and success through training and supporting career goals for postdocs. So those are just a few resources that I wanted to point out, call attention to, that are available for proposal development and just research development in general. Finally, I wanted to point out some key takeaways here from our presentation today. I think the biggest one is start early, as early as you can. The earlier, the better. The later we start the process, the more likely we are to miss something, especially key things that require cross-unit collaboration. If we need to get a letter of support from another office, including the president's office or the VPR or the provost, that can take a significant amount of time. If there are memberships that are needed, if there are certifications that we have to get, all of that can take a significant amount of time. Working with outside institutions, we have to make sure that we are giving collaborating institutions enough time as well. So as early as possible, please, let your proposal administrator know. If you have a question about when to start, reach out to your proposal administrator. We are happy to start as early as you are ready to start. Below that, review the SRS submission guidelines well in advance of your intent to submit so that you are aware of the timeline expectations. When you're preparing your scope and even preparing a budget draft, ensure alignment between the budget and scope. You don't want to have a scope of work or a description and then a budget that is either under or over inflated. They really needs to align with the needs of your scope. Review funding opportunity announcements carefully and closely. This is something we encounter quite a bit where, the mission is aligned with research that we plan to do, but we didn't see the eligibility or we didn't see the limitation. And then you've done, researchers have done all this work and we find that they're not eligible to apply. So that can mean jumping through some hoops to get approvals to submit in a way that we are eligible, or it means we just simply can't submit to this and all of that work has to be pivoted to something else. So before you start working on a proposal, be sure to review the funding announcement carefully and closely. And then when in doubt, ask. Our proposal administrators are always more than happy to take a look at anything. We're happy to answer any questions, provide any guidance that we can, point you in the right direction. So when in doubt, shoot us an email, give us a call, and we're happy to help. And that is all we have. Hopefully this course, this helps everyone be better prepared, especially principal investigators, in knowing what to expect when preparing a proposal, particularly with us at SRS. We appreciate the time that everyone took in attending. And we look forward to hearing from our principal investigators soon on planned submissions.